really nice. Alright folks, I get a lot of questions on how I choose what sink tips that I use and how I figure out with them for the depth of the water and everything else, how I choose if I'm running too heavy or too light of a tip. So this little tip video is to give you an idea how I figure it out. It's not all that complicated. Generally what you do is use the equation of the river, the depth, the speed, divided by EM square or WX, and divide that by Z to the third pi. It's not complicated at all. It's no math equation. It's just a little bit of judgment and a little bit of trial and error. But anyways, this is the tip video on how I usually figure out what tips I do for which depth. Hope you find it helpful. Here we go. Alright, I'm going to start out and show you what it looks like when I think the tip is too light, and then I'll show you how I kind of what I do to make an adjustment to when I think the tip is right. If the tip is too heavy, you'll know. I mean, it'll be dragging, and I want a clean swing. I'm always looking for that clean swing. And I don't want that tip to be making powder and dragging the fly to the bottom. I want that fly swimming. But you still got to always, and I always say this, you've got to find bottom. Once you know where bottom is, you can adjust up. But you got to know where bottom is. If you don't know where bottom is, you haven't found bottom, you don't know where you're in the water column. You really don't have a clue. So you got to find that bottom, then you can make your adjustments. So I'm going to show you what it looks like, or what I think it does, and how I figure out, yeah, the tip's too light, to yes, the tip is just right. If the tip is too heavy, once you've experienced it, you'll know what I mean. It's just dragging through. Now keep in mind, if you think your tip is too light, it is. Because most of the mistakes everybody makes is they fish too light of a tip. So when in doubt, you want to see if you can find bottom. And if you can find bottom in the main part of the swing, then you can definitely control your depth and you can make some adjustments. You got to play a lot of games to get down. You may want to go a little heavier tip. If you can't find bottom, you're going to definitely want to go and try a heavier tip. The other thing to keep in mind is when you're working up and down the river, you go from pool to pool to pool, water speed, water depth, water pressures, all that change. And sometimes you got to adjust your tip, swap out a tip for that particular run you're in. Sometimes you can play some line handling games and you can control your depth that way, but you always got to know, once again, where bottom is, so you can make those adjustments. But be prepared to carry a bunch of different tips. On the end of this little tip video, I'm going to show you some of the tips that I use and what kind of what I have in my, got it on my, yep, Sure Pocket. I think you're all familiar with the old Ziploc thing. My favorite leader wallet. And you make adjustments as you go up and down. That's the nice thing about a Skagit, is we can just swap a tip out. And it doesn't take long to do it. So here we go. This will be how I kind of go about doing it. Keep in mind, I'm not going to show you what too heavy is, because once you have too heavy tip, you'll know, because you're just dragging and hanging bottom, and you don't want that. You watch the cast and the presentation I'm doing, where I'm putting a lot of slack, or what I should say, more like dead drifting the tip and the driver head. What I'm trying to do is evaluate if my sink tip is too light or too heavy. In this case, I'm under the assumption that it's just too light. So what I was trying to do was confirm my depth I was fishing at by trying to really aggressively sink that tip, find bottom. Because I repeatedly say, you never know where you are until you find bottom. From bottom you can adjust up. Well, I can't find bottom with this tip, and even though the swing speed is beautiful, it's laying out good, I'm getting a nice lay on the water, which doesn't matter, but more importantly, the presentation, the speed of the swing is excellent and the control coming through is excellent, but I'm not finding bottom. More importantly, I'm not finding bottom in the mid part of the river, in the mid part of the swing. I'm not even finding bottom coming out into the shallow. So obviously, even though I like the speed of the swing, I'm finding I'm probably running way too high in the water column for these fish and this water depth and flow. So what I'm going to do is go to just one step up. In this case, I'm running a 7-second poly leader. I'm going to go and put on of 10 foot. I'm going to go put on a chunk of 10 foot of T8. Just step it up a little bit and sink rate and see if that gets to fly down a little deeper. The speed is great. So this is where it gets a little bit of, you got to check your depth and find your depth once in a while when you're fishing. Because it can be deceptive right here, because speed of the swing is excellent. Everything looks really good. It's just that I'm too high in the water column. And the reason why how I know that is because I tested it by trying to find the bottom, and I couldn't find the bottom of this setup. Even though I was running a pretty heavy fly, I still wasn't feeling bottom or making contact at the bottom or seeing that little bump or pause in the swing telling me that, yeah, I'm dragging bottom. You know, once again, we want a clean swing, but we got to find bottom to know where we are, and I can't find bottom, so I'm assuming that my problem I'm having right now is tip is too light. We're going to bump it up one tip size and see how it works. This time what I'm seeing is a little slower swing, but more importantly what I'm doing now is I can detect, you might not see it on the camera, but I can actually see the front of my driver head just react ever so pauses, which means that the tip is making contact with the bottom. So yeah, going up one sink rate in this case is definitely was the thing I needed to do, because the first tip, the lighter tip, was just too high in the column. I'm a little deeper in the column. Now obviously that could change. Some days when we're chasing dropbacks like today, if the water's really warm, that high fly would be fine. But today we're still dealing with a weather front and some cold temperatures, a little bit of boat traffic. So the fish want that. I want that fly a little bit deeper. So now that I found bottom, I can control my depth a little bit different. And it was just a matter of having to realize that the first tip was I just couldn't find bottom. The heavier tip, I could find bottom. Now I can control my depth. Okay, continuing of my discussion on how to pick the right tips for the conditions. You'll notice different coat, different day, different rod, different water flow, but same spot. First, so I want to quickly go and talk a bit about the equipment change, because we all like equipment. So the first part of this video, I was fishing this spot with a dam release of 285 CFS. And I was using a floating Skagit head, and eventually I started out with a poly leader, then shifted over to 10 foot of T8, as you saw me go through that diagnosis of too light to just right. Obviously, I'm not going to show if it's too heavy, because you'll know when your fly's dragging through the swing, you're way too heavy. You want a clean swing. So you want to just work just off, you want to know where bottom is, but you want to be just off bottom and get a clean swing. You'll know it because you'll be hanging up and feeling the fly just in the tip bump dragging through. But anyways, water went from 285 to now 750, so we more than doubled the flow. So as a result, different rod, we all like gear rods. I grabbed this rod because I got to, the water went up and I already know where I was the day before. So it's an easy adjustment, because in this case, I know this water, like y'all, the more you fish the water, the more you get to know it, which helps you select tips. Is I grabbed this because two things. One, it's got a real game changer line. I think it's a game changer too, so it's kind of got the intermediate. It'll sink, it'll cut through the over the faster water into a little slower column. That'll help get my fly down. And obviously we were running T8, and now the water more than double, so I'm going to run T14, because I can use the judgment call of where I was before by knowing the water, and then just make an adjustment so I get a really strong starting point. So that's what I'm doing right now. That's with the gear. That's what happens when, you know, a condition change, and that's how you can adjust. Once again, I've talked about this in other videos with rigs and how I set rods up, where I like to use a running line in the loop systems, a modular setup for my rods, and that's one of the reasons. You show up, the water came up, you can pull off your floating, put on a game changer line, make adjustment, and that whole adjustment just takes a few minutes, and you can adjust for the conditions as they go. That's one of the nice things about these systems. And obviously with this water, we're definitely going to run a Skagit, because we're going to be chucking, at least I'm going to start out with T14. Who knows, I might have to go to T17 the way this particular structure of this water is right here. But we'll see. So this is, all right, now I'm going to talk about tips. Here, let me set my rod aside. All right, tips. Let me drag out my beloved leader wallet. Ziploc baggies. But what's more important is I can carry everything I need and put it in a sure pocket. That's the nice thing about tips. And the other thing is with these tips, we can keep adjusting. Now, I use a lot of the Rio Motips and Rio poly leaders. But it doesn't matter. I use Rios because that's what I have. I use them because they're readily available and I get used to them. So like here again, you know, poly leaders. What's that? Chunk of T11. Other sink rates. Even leave the price tags on because I just go through them so much. Here's another one. This is a 10-foot poly. I won't be using that today. This is a 5-second poly. Then we're back to a heavy mow, 10 foot of T17. Might be using that. But the thing is it doesn't matter if you use the Rio tips like I do, or if you use OPS or Cortland or Cyangler. My suggestion is whatever brand you use, stay with that brand, because every company's sink rates are just a little bit different for the numbers. And as you get used to running these things and you get some experience with them, it's easier for you to make a judgment call. If you kind of mix across the brands, very often it's kind of hard to go, you know, for an example, OPS goes riff, run, and bucket, and they got different lengths of sink rates. But once you get used to using them, or like the Motips when they use like the T11 or T8, T11, T14, 17, and then you got all sorts of hybridides with floatings or intermediates with sinks. Once you build up a collection of those things and you start working with them, it'll be easier for you to diagnose if you're running too deep or not deep enough or just right. And plus, as you fish through your water, experiment. If you think you're going too fast or you think you're going too high and you're not finding bottom, you're definitely running too light of a tip. So that's something there. So I would suggest is just stay with one brand and get a collection from light to heavy. And I like full length tips because when it comes to swings, I like that full 10. I use 10 and 12 foot sink tips on my rivers just because they fit. So if you got a much bigger river, you may want to run some 15 foot. So if you got some smaller water, you may want to run like a tip that's got some floating or some medium sink with a sink there to fit the size of your pools. A lot of that has to do with smaller water, shorter tips, bigger water, longer tips. You know, pretty self-explanatory there. But the biggest thing is, after all this I show you and I explain to you, you still need to get underwater. There's no magic formula. I mean, that E square divided by pi by CFS equals rod length divided by depth of water. You know, there's no magic equation. It's just a judgment call of I'm not finding bottom or I'm dragging. I need to go heavier. I need to go lighter. Oops, I was using these tips today and the water just came up. So I know I got a base in which to start with, and I know to either go a little heavier. Oh, the water dropped, so I go a little lighter. I might want to pull off my game changes, put a floating line on so I don't sink as aggressively if the water drops. So once you start working with this and you got that base to start with, then it's real easy to adjust to the conditions. But when you start out green, you just kind of like that sequence that I talked about. You make a guess and you try it, and if it's too heavy, then you know which direction to go. Once again, it's just find bottom, work off on bottom, and when in doubt, slow, especially for steelhead, slow to swing down, and just make sure it's clean. You know, with steelhead, I err on the slow side. Atlantic salmon, I err on the high and fast side. So just to make things a little bit more complicated, if I knew there was Atlantics and I'm looking for Atlantics, I want my fly higher in the water column. I want it swinging faster. With steelhead and Pacific salmon, I want my flies a little deeper and a little slower. So that's something I keep in mind when I'm adjusting tips of the species I'm in. The other thing I keep in mind is water temperatures. The colder the water temperature, the slower I want that swing. The warmer the water temperature, I can get away a little faster and a little higher in the water column. You know, as I'm shooting this, we're in drop back mode. I'll give you a classic example. It's been cold the last few days while the puffy on, and water temperatures went 50s back down to the 40s. So we had a thermal shock. It's a little cooler. The water's up. So today I'm going to err on the lower, slower side of my swing. If water was dropping and warming, I'd err on a little higher up, make that fly a little bit more visible, and make it a little faster. The fish metabolic rate's going to be up. When you get into 50s, they can get very aggressive. In the 40s, they get a little groggy, but they're still hungry, and I want that fly to be visible, especially at this time of year. During the winter, I want that fly really slow, low and slow. So there again, you're always adjusting to water temperatures and water flows. But once again, once you find bottom, and you know you're just off bottom, then you can start playing around your swing speeds and angles then it becomes line handling. So that's pretty much what I do to figure out what I use for tips. A lot of it is experience and a little bit of judgment call, knowing my water. So on the end of all this, what I say to everybody is find bottom, fish just above it, start working with the tips. It's going to be a little bit confusing at first. It's going to feel like a little bit of magic and witchcraft at first, but the more you work at it, the better you're going to get. Just remember, we need the right tip to fish with, not the right tip to cast with. The fish don't care about our casting. We do. The fish care about presentation. So if you want to catch fish, worry about the presentation, worry about getting the fly right, worry about the tip, and then just adjust your cast accordingly. So that's how I do it. I hope this was helpful. I'm quite sure I'm going to get a lot of questions in the comments, so just put them in the comments. I'll get to you as soon as I can. And get out on the water, experiment with the tips, start working with the tips, and the more you do it, the more this is going to make sense. Until then, good fishing, good luck, and get on the water and just do it. See you, folks. This is Jay at JPEG Guides and Lost River Fishing. We are a year-round fly fishing catch and release guide service. We fish the Lake Ontario tributaries, and then during the spring and the summer we also fish the inland trout streams, classic dry fly fishing. During the heat of the summer we will do the warm water fishing for bass and pike. If you're interested in any of our outings or have any questions, please feel free to email us at fish@lostriversfishing.com. Hope to hear from you, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact us.